Okay. Well, I mean, you didn't miss the, the core data stuff, so that's good. But I mean, you're gonna have the code for this.
Okay.
So, and I'm also gonna do this demo again, either tomorrow or Thursday. So it's gonna be. Hopefully, you guys were paying attention, right?
That's so bad, dude.
Yeah.
That was the biggest troll of life right there.
Well, that was a test. You pay attention to the demo while it's happening, so that you don't need the video, right? So, okay. I mean, so far we have just the add functionality, right? So we made our table view. We can go to the add view controller. We can add some stuff.
Wait, are we recording now?
It's recording now. Yeah. Okay. So we're gonna add some stuff. We're gonna click save, and it's gonna be added onto our table, right? Very simple. So I think that was like what, 15 minutes? It wasn't too bad, right?
Just trying to justify.
No, because I looked down. I was trying to see how long it took, and then I looked down. Usually on the touch bar, it has the time, and it was like, whoa, it's not there. Right. So, okay. So just quick recap: we have beast-list table view controller. We made a custom delegate called the add item delegate, and then we assigned it to the beast bucket list table view controller. We implemented that protocol function. We did a prepare for seg, and we set this vc.delegate to be self, so that in the add item delegate, when you click on save, this guy actually has something inside of it and not nil. So then it'll call this done adding function on the delegate view controller, which is this guy, which is this function. So it'll call that function and it'll do this stuff, right? So, and then it'll dismiss, and we've successfully added something, right? So now we're gonna do this edit bit, right? So if we're gonna edit it, we don't want, so here in our storyboard, we want to still transition over to this guy, but if we're editing, we're not gonna click on that. We're gonna click on one of the cells, right? So in order for us to trigger some action happening when the cell is clicked, we're gonna have to go over here and implement that table view function. Did select row add, right? So if I select a row, I am going to be able to run whatever it is between this function here, and I can print out, let's say, the index path.row, right? It's telling me I need to override. Right, there we go. And you need to do the override because the UI table view controller parent has that function. And that's why you're overriding it. Okay, so if I click on that one, it should print 0, right? Click on this one, it should print 2, 1. So whatever cell I click, it's going to print out the index, right? So what we're going to do now is when we click on a cell, we're going to try to edit it, right? Edit. So we're going to do the prepare for, or perform seg rather, right? We're going to perform a seg with the identifier, and we're going to name this some identifier, and we'll just say add vc. The sender is going to be index path.row, because I want to send over that integer to mark which cell was clicked. Now, because I gave it this add vc identifier, I'm going to have to go into the storyboard, give this seg this exact same identifier, otherwise it'll crash. Right, so there we go. Now we're going to perform the seg, and now we have a decision to make, right, in this prepare for seg. So it's the sender is either a bar button or it's an integer. So if sender is int, we know that we're editing, right? Or else we are So if we're adding, add item del, it's going to be self. If we're editing, we are going to pass in the string corresponding to the item we're editing, right? So over here in the add item view controller, we're going to have to create a variable called item to edit. This is going to be a string. It's an optional. So over here, if we're editing it, we're going to set that. So vc.item to edit is going to be equal to the list array of index sender. Right? It's telling me that I need to force unwrap that. Cannot subscript value string with index type of any. Okay, so it's saying that it's an any type. But if we do this, then we can make it an int. So we can use it as one of the indexes. Right? Cannot invoke initializer for type int with argument list type any. Okay, maybe we don't do it that way. We do it this way. All right, so we safe unwrap this guy. So we say if let s, or we'll just call idx index, equal to sender as int, then we're gonna put in the list array of idx. Okay, question mark because it's optional. Okay, now it looks good. So if it is editing, we're going to set this item to edit. If we're not editing, we're not setting that. So it's going to remain nil, right? So inside of our add item view controller, in the view did load, we can simply check to see if it's editing or adding, right? So here, check to see if adding or editing. How do we check that? How do we know? If item to edit, or rather, let's do this. Because it's an optional, let's just safe unwrap it. If let the item equals to item to edit, then we know we're editing, right? Because this guy, it's not nil. If it's nil, it would go over here. Right here, we're going to be adding because it's nil. Because we tried to safe unwrap and it didn't happen, so that we know that we got a nil here. So it's adding. So here we're editing. If we're editing it, we can say we're going to auto-populate this item field. So item field.text is going to be equal to item, right? The thing that we unwrapped from this optional, the item to edit one, which was passed in by this bucketless view controller. So if we're adding, then we don't really, we don't need to do anything. We can just print adding. Okay. So let's take a look at what we got so far. So every time I restart this app, it's gonna load the three things that we hard coded. All right, first thing, second thing, third thing. We can add some other things. It's going to be added in there. If we click on it, it's going to edit and it's going to show in this auto-populate, right? So what we need to do now for the editing part is that if we click on save and it's editing, then we don't want to add it to the list. Rather, we want to just change whatever item in that index of the list is, right? So we're going to have to create another custom delegate. We're going to call this guy the edit item delegate. Protocol edit item delegate class func done editing, and we're going to pass in not only the new item, or let's call it the edited item, that's a string, we're also going to pass in the index. Right? And this is an int. Okay. Or, I mean, I guess we don't, this is not really necessary. We need to figure out a way to save this integer, this index, because that determines which item we edit on the array, right? But we don't necessarily have to pass it in, right? The thing that the add item view controller needs to pass back is really just that, because that's the only bit of information that is, you know, proprietary to that view controller. The index I already know. I know the index is going to be IDX right here, right? So we can just make a global variable over here, right? So IDX cache, that is an integer. It's an optional, and we're going to say IDX cache is going to be equal to IDX, like that. So we saved it. So now we have that available for us in a global variable. All right. So in the edit item, the only thing we pass back is this edited item, right? So we do the same thing we did before, and we're just repeating the steps, going back to the bucket list view controller. He is going to be the edit item delegate, and we're going to implement that function here called done editing. And we got back this edited item. In the edited item, we're going to say, what we're going to do is we're going to change the list array of index IDX cache, which is a global variable. We're going to set that equal to edited item. All right, what is this? Value of optional type int not unwrapped. Okay, so item cache is an optional, so we're going to safe unwrap it. Let I equals to IDX cache if let. Then we're going to move this in here, and we're going to say for list array of index I, you are equal to edited item, right? And then we do the table view dot reload data, and then it should reflect this change in our table view, right? So the same thing happens. We have to go to the add item view controller, add in that delegate, right? So we have to do var, let's say edit item del, it's of type edit item delegate, optional. Over here, we're going to set that when we transition to when we're editing, right? So if we're editing, then we're going to say bc.edit item del equal to self, right? So we make sure that we give it some value. Now, the only thing left to do here is when we click on save, again, we have to check to see if we're adding or editing, right? So if we're adding, we're going to run that. If we're editing, we're going to run the other one, right? So if let item equals to, let's say, or we can just do this. We can say if item to edit even exists, because in optional it can be nil. If it's nil, it'll just, oops, what is this? There we go. I had to say, okay, if it's not equal to nil, then we know we're editing, or else we're adding. Okay, for adding, we're going to run this function. If we're editing, we're going to run edit item del dot done editing. We're going to pass in the edited item, which is the same as this. It's going to be item field dot text. All right, so this should finish the editing bit. So we can add something, and then we click on it. Let's edit this. Boom, there we go. It's edited, right? So we did the add and the edit. Now delete is really, really easy, right? So I remember yesterday I gave you guys the code on Stack Overflow for swipe to delete. It's literally just this function. You copy it, you put it to the table views. This is another table view function, and in here we're going to say we're going to delete stuff, right? And this one, if we're going to delete it, it's telling me I need to override. So if I'm going to delete it, I just remove it from the array, right? So list array dot remove at index, and the index which I am removing is going to be index path dot row. Right? And after I do that, I do table view dot reload data, and it should be gone. Right? Just simple as that. So if the delete function works, then we have successfully just created that assignment for bucket list, right? And even this is the bucket list refactor because there's only one segment, right? So that was like what, half an hour? Okay. So add some stuff, we can edit some stuff, and we can delete some stuff, right? Swipe to delete. Right now, everything is working. If I restart it, we'll get thing 1, thing 2, thing 3 again. Nothing is persisting, right? Everything is kind of like reinstantiated from scratch every time, right? So any questions before we jump into data persistence, right? So I'm sorry about not recording the first half of the video for the bucket list, but I think the first half should be you should be able to figure that out. The second half is it's pretty much repeating what the first half is, right? So okay, so let's talk about data persistence, right? So there's a few ways you can persist data. There's two main different ways you can do it. One is on the device. The other one is via some external server and database, right? The API way we're not going to really talk about until next week. This week we're going to talk about how to do it on the device. On the device, there's a few different ways you can do it. There's NSUser defaults. That's the first way, the easiest way, I think. It's mainly designed to save like user defaults, like a setting. If you want the setting to be this theme or that theme, it's not important, but it needs to persist for the user when they open this app on their phone. Something that uses NSUser defaults would be like the times in your alarm clock app, right? Like wake me up at 7, 7:05, 7:10. Those things are not really sensitive. It's okay if you delete the app and you download it again, it's all gone. It's fine. So NSUser defaults, easy to save those settings. If you want to learn how to do it, it's just one Stack Overflow query away. Very easy, just one line code. NS coding is another way you can do it. Basically, you're creating a file, you're putting this data in here, and you're encoding it, and you're just saving that file for some later time where you can get that and decode it and then use it. It's good for like saving big chunks of data that you're not going to retrieve often, and it's just for like like a stash where you're just keeping it there for whatever reason. Right. So the third one we're talking about is core data. That is the one that is going to be on the exam. It's a very robust and fully functional relational database on the phone itself. So it's a MySQL, it's a SQLite database that is being interfaced using the syntax that I'm going to show you. So not unlike Python, where you had to go into MySQL Workbench and write SQL queries, all of that stuff on your phone is there, but you don't interface with it using the SQL stuff. You interface with it using some code that Apple provides you, right? So if you're going to retrieve some stuff, you got to do it via the Apple syntax. And also, if you're creating models, you don't do it via the Workbench where you did it before. You do it via this thing called the data model file. And I'm going to show you how to do that. It's really, really easy. Okay, so let's go ahead and add core data to our bucket list here. All right, so our bucket looks pretty good. All right, we're going to go and add core data to that. And I'm just going to refer to the platform because you guys have access to this. All right, so you can do it later on and follow along if you want. All right, so we go to intermediate. We're going to go to data persistence. this is pretty much just what I talked about. Okay, so in our app delegate, we're going to have to import core data. That's the first step. All right, so we go to our app delegate. On top, we're going to import core data. The next step is copying all of this and then pasting it within our app delegate here. So I'm just going to paste it right here. All right. Persistent container, name bucket list. Okay, that's fine. We're going to add this self.save context into our application will terminate, so that whenever the application, either somebody closes it or it crashes or something, we're going to just save whatever it is so we don't lose that. Okay. So over here, I believe everything is good. We don't see any errors. And that's all the code you need to add. If you check the box for core data, it's going to give you that code, right? All right, so next step. We're going to create our data model, right? We're going to have to create this data model file. If you check the box, you're going to see that file here. But since we didn't check the box when we made it, we're going to have to create it ourselves. So we go over here, we go Command N. Down here, we have this data model file. We're going to select that. Next. And we're going to call this guy. Now, this is the thing. We have to name it the same thing that we named it over here on the app delegate. So we named it, let's see, what did we name it? We named it bucket list, right? So we're going to have to name this guy bucket list. Okay, so we have this bucket list.xc data model D file. In here, we're going to create our models, right? So in Swift, we call them entities, right? So it's very much like a table, right? So in this case, we're going to say, we're going to add an entity, we're going to name it item. Okay, let's see what the platform names it, just to be more consistent. So we are going to, oh, it didn't, our custom entity name, awesome entity. Okay, well, we're just going to name it item. Okay, we're just call it item. For the item attribute, there is a, let's say, a title, right? That's the one thing we have, and it's going to be a string, right? So we have item. It has an attribute called title. That's a string, and that's the thing we're going to display on our table. All right. So we save that. Actually, let's do Command B to build it, and it looks like the build failed because could not determine generated file path coordinated generation. What is this? I'm going to close this, and I'm going to open it again, see if it works. No current version for model path. Bucket list. Well, let's delete this. Build it again. Okay, no problem. Let's make this data model. We'll just call it model. Build it. Huh. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, well, now it's working. Okay, so we're back to where we started. It looks like it didn't pick up that file for some reason when I created it. It might have been something when I created it and it didn't link correctly, so I just dragged it back in, and now we have it again, and now it's working. Okay, so we have this entity called item that has a title. All right, so the next thing we got to do is, in order to save an item, now let's take a look at our notes here, what we have. All right, we're gonna add core data to the bucket list. We're gonna add core data code from the app delegate. We did that. Import core data. We added this code. We created the data model file, which is this file here. We created an entity. It's analogous to tables and collections. Right? We named it item. We created the property. We called it title. It's analogous to columns and properties. We are going to add core data code to the view controller now. Okay, so now that we've created all of this setup, we can actually start using core data in our code. So the thing with core data is nice that you can change, you can edit things and add things from any view controller, any file, and save it, and then it'll persist everywhere. So you don't have to necessarily go back to any view controller to do that thing. You can do it from anywhere. So in the add item view controller, this is where I want to start adding things, right? So in this view controller, I'm going to import core data, right? That's the first step. The second step, first step is import core data. The second step is you need to have a managed object context. And over here on the platform, you can copy this piece of code, and that is going to be a constant. And it has to be a global constant. And you can name it anything you want. For me, I like to name it context, just to save some space. Context. And basically what it is you're creating a sandbox. Right? You're creating this context for which you can move things around and add things. And then when you save it, you check to see if there's any changes. And if there are changes, now you save whatever you did in the sandbox so that it persists the next time you open the sandbox. And so the sandbox is kind of like your data model. What's going on, what the data is saved in your database, right? So when you load the context right here, you're grabbing a copy of what the data looks like, and you're saving it in that variable called context, right? This is a special Swift thing, right? Once you have that, you can now add to the context, or you can edit the context, or you can delete things from the context, and then you save it, and then it'll be saved, right? So if you don't understand exactly how it works for now, just know how to use it, right? Later on, as you're familiar with it, you're going to pick up what it actually does. In the beginning, it's enough to just know that this thing is there, kind of what it does, and how to use it, right? So the things that you need to remember: import core data, you need to have a context as a global variable here, okay? So that is this line. Now, once we have these two things set up in our view controller, we can start with our CRUD operations, right? So we can create new entities in the platform. Over here, create a new entity, right? We're going to copy this line, and we're going to edit it so that it fits what we're going to do. So when we click the save button, if we are adding, right, we're going to comment that out because we're not doing that anymore. We're going to create, let's say, let new item equal to ns entity description, insert new object. For entity name, we named it item, right? And this corresponds to this entity here. Whatever we call it here, we're going to have to write the same name into context. I changed the name from earlier, right? It has to match this guy as your custom entity name, which is item, right? So now we've created a new item object, and we've added it to our context. Now once we've done that, we can give it some properties. So new item dot title, right, equals to this input field dot text that the user has typed in. Right? So once we do that, all we need to do now is just save it. We need to save the context. So right here, if the context has changes, we are going to try context.save. If we've saved it, it's going to print success. If not, it's going to print an error. And it'll be saved in our data model. So no matter at some later time, no matter where you are from what view controller, if you fetch all of the things, you're going to see this new entity there, right? So let's do this. So I think on the next section here on the platform, it shows you how to fetch all the items, right? So we're going to create a function in our bucket list view controller that whenever we call that function, it's going to go into our core data, fetch all the stuff, and then reload the table view. Okay, so here we're going to say fetch all items from core data. Right. So first thing we need to do, right? We're going to have to import core data. Second thing we're going to have to do is we're going to have to put the context there. So since we already wrote that, we're just going to copy this code, that constant. We're going to paste it in here. For every view controller you're using core data, you always have to have that on top, right? So this one, we have it, we imported core data, everything's good. Now we're going to create a function called fetch stuff, right? So it's going to go into our core data and it's going to go fetch all of our stuff, right? So here I'm going to print fetching from core data, and I'm going to call this function when the view loads. Right? So the view did load, I'm going to call that. As soon as the view loads, we'll run this function. I'm going to make a query to core data, get back all this stuff, and then we'll reload the table view. Right? So let's see how we do that. Fetching items from core data. Tell core data that we want to fetch items. So this line of code. What we're doing here is we're creating a constant called item request, and this is of type NSFetchRequest. So it's like an object, a special kind of Swift core data object that lets us define what we want to do. In this case, it's a fetch request. So the entity name, you have to make sure that it's the entity name that you gave it, item, right? Now that we have this, we can iterate through the records and fetch all of our stuff, right? So we're going to get the results from the context dot fetch item request, and then over here, let's do this, right? So this is really all we need. Now that we have our results, the results is going to be an array, and it's going to be an array of item objects, right? Because that's what we fetched it from this entity, right? So we can do this. We can say for results, result in results, we're going to say result dot title, or let's see. Okay. So this is what we got to do. So we have to downcast it as. Okay. So let's do this. So we got back at a result, and we're going to say we're going to create a. This is the. What did they call it? Items. Right. We're going to say items equal to results as an array of items. Right? Because that's what we named it in our entity over here. Right. So once we have that, let items equal to that. Okay. So now we can iterate through it. right? So we can say for I in items, we can print I dot title, right? And we're going to fetch all this stuff. That's optional, so we're unwrapping it, right? Every time the view loads, it's going to go into our records, and it's going to print the titles of all the stuff that we have, right? So let's take a look if that works. All right, let's go ahead and add something, right? So I'm going to add a bunch of 1s. I'm going to save it. We're going to add a bunch of 2s. Save it. Then we're going to add a bunch of 3s. We're going to save it. Now, it's not showing up because we didn't put it on the table yet. But if I stop it and run it again, we should see when the view loads, we should see those 3 titles being printed. And those are from core data, right? These guys are from core data. So I'm fetching from core data and I'm getting those entities that we saved, right? So what we can do now is we can say, let's do this. So instead of having an array of these strings, let's make this list array an array of items. I'm going to initialize that to be an empty array. Okay. So now instead of holding strings, it's holding the entity type from core data. So now over here we can say, let's comment this out for now, right? When we fetch it from core data, we can say our list array is equal to items. Or, I mean, we don't even need items anymore, right? We can just put this down here, and we set that global variable to become the results of whatever we got from core data. Right? So now our list array will contain the results that we got back, and then we can do a table view dot reload data once all of that is saved inside of this global variable. And when we do the table view dot reload data, it's going to go to our table view function. It's going to do all this again. Right? So we're going to set the data here, and instead of setting it to be list array of indexpath.row, we have to set it as list array indexpath.row dot title, because now that element is an object. It's an item object, which has an attribute called title. Right? Okay. So I'm going to command, well, let's stop this. Command B, I'm going to build it. Build failed over here. Ah, okay, so this is like the editing stuff, and this is the adding stuff, right? So let's go ahead and comment this out. We're going to comment the editing part out as well. And VC item to edit list array idx dot title, right? Because now it's an item object, and we're sending over the title, which is that string. So if we build it, everything should be good. Now, what we need to do is that every time we make a change in this view controller, we still need to tell the other view controller to reload its data and fetch all of the items in the opposite order. Fetch all the items and then reload the data. So over here, the add item del done editing, I don't need to send it anything, right? So over here, I'm going to edit this. I'm going to edit it so that I'm not passing any arguments. Over here, the edit item, I'm not passing in any arguments. All I'm doing is I'm just triggering a reload. Okay, so in the bucket list here, we're going to edit these 2 functions as well. We're not taking in any arguments. So over here, add item, when we trigger done editing, we just call the function. We call done adding, done editing. We could make this the same one, right? There's no difference. It's all we're doing is we're telling the bucket list view controller, hey, something changed, reload your data, right? So when we call these functions there, we're going to go over here and we're going to say, instead of appending to that list, we're just going to do a table view dot reload data. or not that. We're gonna call this function fetch stuffs, because we need to get it from core data first, and then in that function it'll reload the data once everything is done. Right? So we don't need this anymore. All we need is just the fetch stuffs, right? In case you guys want to see it later, right? But we're just calling this function. Okay. So if we add something now, it should add, and it should persist. So now, when this loads, it should load 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, 2, 3, 3, right? Because this is from core data. Now, if we add something, let's say 4, 4, 4, 4, save it, and we stop it and run it again, that is now going to persist, right? Because now, instead of just creating variables and giving it fixtures, we're fetching that from core data and then we're displaying it, right? So the persistent add works. Now we're going to do a persistent edit, and in order to do that, we're going to have to pass in let's do this. So when we edit it, all we need to do to edit is really just edit whatever it is in this array. We edit the thing in this array, and then we save the context, and it'll be edited, right? So in that case, we are going to need to pass back the item to the edited item, right? That's a string. Right, edit the item, and then over here we're going to edit that again. So over here we're going to say edited item, you are string, and then when we call that function over here, we're going to have to give it that argument, right? It's going to be the same thing we did before, it's just the text field. And then once we get back to the bucket list controller with the edited item, we will simply we're going to do this again. We're going to uncomment this. So let I equals to ID as cache, which is still the same thing. But instead we're going to say list array of I dot title is going to be this edited item. So we have changed the property on that, and then we're going to have to save it and then fetch the stuffs again, right? So we're going to do the if context has changes, which we know it will have changes because we just changed it, right? We changed it up here. We're going to save it. If we are successful in saving it, then we're going to do the fetch stuffs, right? And that should do it. That should do the editing. So let's take a look. So this stuff is from core data. If I wanted to edit this one, save, boom, it's edited. Right now, to make sure that it persists, we're going to run it again and see if the changes persisted. If it did, then we know that it's persistent, right? There we go, persisted. So the last part here is just to delete, right? So very easy to do. We're just going to go to this function where we're deleting it. We're going to, instead of listarray.remove, which is how you delete something from an array, we're going to delete it from core data, save the context, and then fetch everything again. Right? So in the third tab for core data, we see that if you're trying to delete something, you just do context.delete some managed object. Right? So we're going to do context.delete, and the managed object is going to be list array of index path dot row. Right? We do that, then we save the context, and if we successfully save it, we fetch the stuffs and it should be deleted. All right, let's delete this. Delete it. If we start again, it should persist. All right, persisted. So that is how you will do CRUD operations. You know, create things, save it, load from core data, edit existing entities, delete existing entities, and that, I guarantee you, will be on the exam. Right? So if you think about it from like the overall kind of big picture perspective, it's a lot easier to do than the way you did it in Python, where you had to set up this MySQL workbench and have all of these crazy models and relationships, and then like, you know, in the code, it's like one of the things you do, right, with the SQL queries. So for this, it's simply just follow the rules. It may seem like a little overwhelming at first, but that's it. There's no more, right? The exam will not go beyond the scope of what I just did. So once you do it a few times, get more familiar. I did everything from the platform, right? I don't really memorize all this stuff. I do have previous projects that I have. Sometimes I look at that just to copy the code over, but it's all here, right? So any questions on this, right? Cool. So try to get as much as you can done. The goal is custom cell, but if you don't get the custom cell, just work off of what you did yesterday, and worst case scenario, we'll have the rest of the week to finish this intermediate. Right?
Is custom cell like a chapter, or is it an assignment?
Custom cell is some reading. It's a lot of reading, but I will demo the custom cell stuff when I do the big demo, either tomorrow or Thursday, most likely Thursday, I think. So custom cell is also something that's pretty useful, and it'll be on the exam as well. So instead of, basically it's what it's saying, that instead of using these cells that are just vanilla and given to you, you can make subclasses of these cells and have code files so that each cell can have its own little UI, and then with all of these actions and outlets as well. And that makes it a lot more useful, because how often do you see like a table view with just a list of things? Right? It's usually some kind of image with like some like button or something like that. So with custom cells, you can do that. Okay, cool.